Let's talk about the spy balloon. Who quit? Who offered their resignation over that? That was a gross failure, right? That was a gross failure. Shouldn't somebody have been fired?
They won't even admit that it was a gross failure.
But shouldn't, in the military, someone should have come forward and said, I was responsible for the defense of our airspace. It was violated. I failed. I am quitting. I'm resigning because I failed to do my job. Nobody's come forward to do that. So that's my concern, is we don't have that ethos now. That's essential to the officer corps.
That's why I brought this whole conversation up, because, like, where's the leadership? But I can see, like, the end of the Roman Republic. Julius Caesar came with the military and took control of military dictatorship empire. I don't want that. But that's where my mind is focused, with a lack of leadership. With, like, what the hell's been happening last month? But where was Biden on East Ohio? Like,
I want to say this. I'm wondering. We talk about morals and ethics, and often it's not black and white. There's a gradient. To what degree do we accept censorship or oppose free speech? Even people who claim to be free speech absolutists, I'm like, you got a limit. If somebody is posting videos of child exploitation, you're probably going to come out and be like, okay, yeah, that's not speech, that's illegal. And it's like, well, it's not, and that means you don't agree, you don't believe that anyone can just say or produce anything they want. There are certain things that are illegal, and then even insofar as, what if you're not a producer of it, you're sharing it for some reason to express an idea? No, still no, you can't do that stuff. So we accept that there are limits in this regard. I wonder about, I kind of lost my train of thought. What were we just talking about?
We were talking about basically, when is it appropriate to resign, the ethics of, a leadership and whose accountability, I thought, was kind of where we were going with this. I got you about Caesar. That was my biggest concern.
Right.
January 6th, there was this narrative.
I got it back.
Okay, I got it back. Go.
Yeah, so my issue is basically, we obviously don't like Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, the Killing Fields, whatever. We see what happens when brutal, merciless dictatorships take over the Soviet Union. But I wonder if the reason there's such a negative view of things like the Roman Empire is because the people who were in those countries who wrote down the stories of what happened were the fat, gluttonous degenerates who were shocked to find that a country was actually trying to have some morals again. What I mean to say is, it's not black and white. There's certainly circumstances where we're like, okay, we got a problem with this dictatorship. And I'm sure there are circumstances where you get a more classically liberal but community-based, stern attitude of service guarantees citizenship. That is to say, a government that doesn't come to you and lock you in a gulag and mercilessly beat you, a government that comes and says, I'm sorry, we're not going to pay your health care because you're a glutton and you're eating too much food, you need to stop. Well, the gluttons, the degenerates, are going to freak out. They're going to write every story in the world about how the fascists are taking over, and we're watching this happen. So if I saw something that was like service guarantee citizenship, if you want to vote, you have to provide some kind of community service. Not military, maybe it's picking up trash. The left is going to scream, fascism, fascism. And I'm kind of like, doesn't that just mean personal responsibility? No one's telling you you're going to prison. No one's going to beat you. You can still speak. You can still play video games. You can still eat all the ho-hos and ding-dongs in the world. But we're saying you've got to be responsible to the community around you. They would call that fascism. So in the event, we did have a quote-unquote military takeover. But I'm saying that, somewhat tongue-in-cheek. I mean quite literally, if they came out and said, hey, there's a minimum standard and it's going to be this, but you'll be able to live your lives as you see fit. The people who are going to write the history books are going to claim a military dictatorship destroyed freedom in this country, when in reality, it might actually just be something like, hey, we're about to collapse. The country is going to fall apart. The economy is spiraling out of control. There's riots in the street. I'll give you a better example. If Donald Trump deployed the military, invoking the Insurrection Act during the Summer of Love, saving 30 plus lives, they would write down in the history books, a military dictator, Donald Trump, suppressed free speech. So I question these narratives throughout history. Some of them are probably bad. Some of them might not have been as bad.
The most recent, at least supposed coup that almost tried to happen in our country was supposed to be January 6th. Chris, you were acting Secretary of Defense at this time, sixth in line for the presidency. So if some coup happened, I think it's sixth in line. Wow. Can somebody fact check me on? I believe it's sixth in line.
No, I didn't. That's pretty good.
Could you tell me a little bit more about not your role in January 6th, but our reaction to it, as I understand, with the National Guard?
Careful with your phrasing there.
And then also we were talking about people resigning. There were a lot of people who resigned from the Trump administration following this.
Yeah, sunshine soldiers. Fair, you brought up, if we would have sent soldiers up on Capitol Hill on January 6th, the morning of. So let's go back. I hate to do this. Let's go back. I'm going to be pedantic and talk about our high school civics class. Capitol Hill, legislative branch, military, executive branch. Capitol Hill, you don't go up there if you're the executive branch of the military unless you're invited. To do something different is called a military coup. So I was not going to be party to that, obviously, because that's un-American and in violation of my oath of office to the Constitution. So this narrative that we should have moved faster or had been up there beforehand would have been. Could you imagine what would have happened if I would have pushed National Guard troops up on Capitol Hill before the riots started?
Wow, it would have been a mess. I know the only person who got killed was Ashley Babbitt by Capitol Police Officer Michael Byrd. That was the only shot fired. Do you think that was a justifiable shot given the situation?
Well, the protective service detail, I don't. It appears to me that when she came through the window, that she crashed in on the security bubble and they shot her. That was the moment when I realized we had been promised that the police in Washington, D.C. and on Capitol Hill could handle up to 1 million protesters that day. And you don't use your military for domestic law enforcement. That's what we have cops for. You don't use military, you don't use soldiers to do domestic law enforcement until civil society is broken down, like a natural disaster in New Orleans. Everything's gone to, you know what? That's when you go in there. That's when the military serves and does law enforcement duties. Until that happens, keep the military out. The military, you talked about Vietnam. Military really violated tons of American civil liberties by spying on Americans. These are the things that are
They're
going
still
through
doing it.
Yeah. My last follow-up was going to be many people in the Trump administration decided to resign as a result of January 6th and the events following it. You chose not to. Can you tell me a little bit more about that decision?
Yeah, because I wanted to get more facts. So, I had been in combat a day or two. I'd been a leader in the military, commander in the military, and you got to be stable. You got to be steady, right? That's what good leaders do. I saw a lot of those political figures that bailed that day doing it for political reasons. I was like, we need to find out what happened. We're still finding out what happened that day. So, here's the one that always bugs me when these bigwigs talk about, well, it would have been, the reason I stayed is because I had to protect something. If it wasn't for me, I had to protect our soldiers. I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's my job. I got 6 weeks left or whatever it was, 4 weeks left. And what was that? Was it Thomas Paine, Sunshine Soldiers? What's that? Yeah. It's like, hey, you get paid for the good times and the bad. And you really get paid for the tough times. That's what the American people pay you for, right?
You never thought it was a coup or anything?
Dude, I was running the military. There was no coup.
Just wanted to make it clear.
Millie was right about that. Millie's like, the only way it has to come through us. There was going to be no military coup. Dude, I spent my life in service to this country, and I swore to protect and defend the Constitution. There's no way that I was going to allow, back to your point about resigning. If it came down to that, and the president was he wasn't going there. If it would have gone there, I would have resigned and gone right outside and gotten on TV and said, I resigned in protest because I was asked to do something anti-constitutional. Period. End of story. Bye. Have a nice day.
That's if he asked for you to bring troops out?
If he was going to use them inappropriately or anti-constitutionally.
What about the I forgot the date. Was it May 29th? What was the insurrection?
Yeah, May 29th.
May 29th. What about that? You had these far leftists setting fire to St. John's Church. They set fire to a guard post at the White House. They tore down barricades, and the response was police. Police came out, did their normal thing. I suppose that's probably the appropriate response.
There were National Guard there. That was one of the, remember, you don't recall the National Guard flew helicopters down the middle of the streets that evening? Wow. Oh, gosh, yeah. There was a lot went on. That's not appropriate use of the military.
You don't think so?
No, that's what you have local law enforcement for? That
Well, what about when they're not doing their jobs? I mean, in Seattle and Portland, we saw, what was it, 120 some odd days of them.
Even New York,
they were firebombing
overwhelmed.
federal buildings. For 100 days, far-left extremists were throwing fire bombs and explosives. Like, at that point, shouldn't the federal government act to defend its territory? Or like its building and like the people who live and work in the area?
Federal government did. They put in huge,
They didn't.
They put in huge numbers of federal law enforcement to protect federal property. The issue was the mayor was on the leftist side of the spectrum and was allowing that to happen. It was a debacle. And you've been out to Portland lately? Oh my gosh.
But all that really happened was federal law enforcement stood inside the building, and then the leftists continued to firebomb it for 100 plus days until they got bored with it and stopped. The feds did not actually come out.
Feds were all over that town. Don't you remember the crisis that happened when?
But how did it go on for 120 days? Like, why did it not stop?
I believe in local government. I don't believe the federal law enforcement should come in without absolutely can protect federal property, but the governor has his National Guard, his or her. They had plenty of access to security forces and law enforcement and National Guard without calling in the federal troops.
If the federal government can't stop people for 3 or 4 months from throwing firebombs at its building, then they should probably just leave. They shouldn't be there because they're completely impotent. I know they were there. They did the joint unit. They had DHS. They had ICE. They had a bunch of CBP or whatever were even coming, and they could do nothing to stop far left extremists occupying the city and firebombing their building.
That was.
So it's like if you can't do it, you shouldn't be there.
It was like they sent troops into a siege, and then they just had to sit there and be sieged for 100
What was the point?
days. It's better than having no troops in the siege.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.